Do you think it's if you had a daughter competing against a biological male, would you find it unfair?
I don't have girls.
Democrats have learned absolutely nothing and are doubling down on trans radicalism and other woke nonsense. We're going to break down all of this, plus Biden goes on The View, a non-binary crime spree at Columbia University, and the Trump administration loses a huge free speech case. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our media, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. Up first, guys, we've got to touch on another story in what's becoming a trend of Democrats learning absolutely nothing. This time, it's another Democratic elected official in the spotlight, Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat out of Connecticut, for an interview he did with the New York Times' resident conservative columnist, Rouse Douthat, with the issue, again, this issue always seems to come up, of transgender women who are biologically male competing in women and girls sports. This issue came up again, and still, despite how unpopular support for this is, despite how obviously contradictory it is to basic science and common sense, Chris Murphy was unwilling to make any concession. Take a listen to this really, really astounding clip.
I don't have any fear of transgender athletes participating in sports, but
wait, just so you don't have any fear of it. Do you think it's if you had a daughter competing against a biological male, would you find it unfair?
I don't have girls, right? So I necessarily can't, right? I can't put myself in that position.
Have some empathy, right, for those of us who do, right? So would you find it unfair?
I mean, I've talked to lots of parents of girls in Connecticut who do not think it's unfair, and who think that the benefits that those athletes get from being part of a team is important, and they don't mind or feel threatened by the competition. I think everybody can come to their own conclusion, but your conclusion is the official line of liberalism right now. It's you're saying you don't. Yes, my conclusion is that I would support those athletes being able to participate in my community, right? In my community, but I would not substitute my judgment and my community's judgment for another community's judgment.
So it was really telling to me how insanely uncomfortable this Democratic senator was about this question. Like, you can tell they are walking on absolute eggshells, terrified to say the wrong thing, even about an issue that, like, 80% of the American public, obviously that's not an exact number, but a huge majority, if you look at polling, agrees sports should be segregated by biology, not identity. And having biological males in women's sports isn't fair. It's not safe. He resorts to a couple straw man arguments like, well, I'm not fearful of transgender athletes. Okay, nobody's fearful of them. They're not going to come eat you. Nobody's worried they're going to consume your children in a cannibalistic rage. It's a question of whether they're fair, whether it's fair for them to compete in women's sports. And most people think it's not. So just answer the question. But he just kept dodging. And kudos to Ross Douthat for really kind of twisting the knife and forcing him to answer his position on this issue, because they really seem scared to speak on it, scared of the activists. And I've covered how unhinged the activist class is on this issue, how crazy the alphabet mafia organizations and groups are, and how little room for dissent there is. But it's very telling to me that even in the post-vibe shift America, Trump's America, where it feels like a lot has changed, very prominent, high-ranking Democratic Party officials are still not willing to acknowledge basic common sense, fair positions for fear of the far left flank, for fear of the woke mob coming after them. And while I don't respect it as a matter of like principle or integrity, I do sort of understand it as a political calculation, because remember, there have been a couple Democrats who've broken on this issue and have spoken out against it. One of those was a Massachusetts congressman named Seth Moulton, and he was viciously attacked for just the basic position of like, listen, I support trans rights. I don't want any discrimination. I support civil rights laws, but I think maybe women's sports, we've got to have some rules to keep out biological males. That's all he ever said or did, and he was attacked viciously Here's some reporting from the New York Times to jog your memory on that one. To get on the wrong side of transgender activists is often to endure their unsparing criticism. After a Democratic congressman defended parents who expressed concern about transgender athletes competing against their young daughters, a local party official and ally compared him to a Nazi cooperator, and a group called Neighbors Against Hate organized a protest outside his office. Seriously, that's what happened when one Democratic congressman broke ranks on this issue. So I guess it's not surprising that they're still kowtowing in fear to these activists, but it is kind of pathetic. And it is going to be a drag on the Democratic Party. I mean, Trump is doing so many controversial things. He's pushing so many boundaries, but a lot of people don't feel like the Democratic Party offers any sort of, myself included, sane or normal alternative. And it's this kind of issue. I know it's not the end of the world. It's just sports. It's just a few thousand people being impacted. Whatever you want to say, it's indicative of a broader point that Democrats are out of touch with reality and common sense and are beholden to crazy radical activists on social issues. And that, as long as that sense prevails, is going to be a massive anchor dragging them down. From me to you, it's some free advice. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. By the way, guys, we don't have a sponsor today, but I did want to announce that we have new merch items available now that feature our Last Brain Cell merch line designs, where it's items you can get, mugs, shirts, cool sweaters that commiserate with me that we're coming down to our last brain cell after dealing with all this delulu. So do check out that merch linked in the description. And by the way, guys, keep sending in voice notes with your woke horror stories, your personal dilemmas, or anything where you want my advice or feedback. I've been loving getting them, going through them all, and doing those Friday episodes where I take your scenarios and give my advice. So do send in more. The link will be in the description. Now we got to talk about a crazy story because we've got a non-binary crime wave on our hands, at least at Columbia University, the supposedly elite New York university that's part of the Ivy League that just had another illegal riot/protest from anti-Israel protesters who took over their library and scared students and disrupted them during finals week. Well, a really interesting report just came out from Jonathan Levine of the Washington Free Beacon, where he found, and this will shock you, disproportionate non-binary representation among the alleged Columbia criminals. 11% of Columbia library arrestees identify as they/them, nearly 7 times America's trans population. Marco Rubio says he's reviewing foreign nationals arrested following the raid, putting one they/them student born in Vietnam at risk. Levine writes, "It's a they-tifada, like Antifada, but they, I guess. At least 9 of the 81 people, or 11%, arrested in connection with storming a Columbia University library Wednesday used they/them pronouns, a review of public records by the Washington Free Beacon shows. That share is well above the 1.6% of Americans who identify as transgender or non-binary, according to the Pew Research Center, and more than double the 5% of people who identify as transgender or non-binary under 30. Now, if anything, these comparisons are a massive underestimate because of that small percentage of the population that identifies as transgender, most of those are transsexual people who identify as a sex that isn't the one they were born at birth, but it are either, men or women in their identity, not they, them, not non-binary. So if anything, it's even more extraordinary overrepresentation than what this report suggests. And the reporter who wrote this story, Levine, covered and specifically profiled several of the arrestees with their they/them pronouns. One of those is a woman named Can Don, they/she, who was arrested at Columbia last week. She was born in Vietnam and wants to write her senior thesis on the Gaza Solidarity Encampment. Well, encampments are illegal, by the way. You have the right to free speech, to protest, to make your voice heard, but you don't have the right to take over buildings and deny people access and disrupt the public. That's a crime. And so doing your thesis on something where you're admitting to crimes is probably not the best thing. And I've been very critical of the push by the Trump administration to revoke student visas because of people's opinions. We'll talk about that. But if you're doing literal crimes like taking over buildings, assaulting cops, these kinds of things that are illegal, your student visa should be revoked and you should be sent back to your home country. And maybe you can complete that thesis virtually then, babe. I don't know. But look, this story is really not that deep. I just thought it was a funny update on the Columbia chaos that we covered last week. And I also just have to say, Blair White has pointed this out, you will never find a non-binary Republican, because it is not an immutable demographic trait like being gay or being black or anything else. It's a political identity. It's a fad that's incoherent at its core, and I will never get over the fact that people want to put that on some sort of level playing field with me and others like me because of who we are, with this radical chic fad that's inseparably intertwined with radical left-wing politics. But that's just my take. Y'all let me know what you think of these they-thems in the comments below. Now, again, on this theme of Democrats learning absolutely nothing, we've got Joe and Jill Biden going on The View, that lovely bastion of hard-hitting cable news journalism, and again, pushing some of the most absurd woke victim narratives that they're still clinging to. President Biden was on there and insisted that Kamala Harris lost not because of her ties to his failed administration, their disastrous border policies, the inflation that happened while he was president, not because of her random cackling and her word salads, not because she only had a couple months to campaign because they stuck with Biden for too long, not any of these real things. Instead, he blamed, shocker, the identity boogeyman. Take a listen to this.
But then election night came, and it was like 2016 all over again. Yeah. So why do you think the vice president lost, and were you surprised?
I wasn't surprised, not because I didn't think the vice president was the most qualified person to be president, and she is. She's qualified to be president of the United States of America. Right. But I was surprised, I wasn't surprised because they went the route of the sexist route, the whole route. I mean, this is a woman, she's this, she's that. I mean, it really, I've never seen quite as successful and a consistent campaign undercutting the notion that a woman couldn't lead the country, and a woman of mixed race. Yeah. And they played that to a fairly.
What? What is old Joe here even talking about? I covered the presidential election very closely, and there really wasn't that much made about the fact that she was a female candidate. She got a lot of praise for it, I guess, but she didn't lean into it that much in the couple months before the presidential election. And the Trump team certainly wasn't making that a big issue. That wasn't a thing. They attacked her over the border. They attacked her over inflation. They attacked her over her crazy past social positions, like saying transgender prisoners and illegal immigrants should get taxpayer-funded sex change surgeries, all these things she was on the record saying, but it wasn't, oh, we can't have a mixed race person leading America. That is just not true. I'm sure you can find some people somewhere who believe that or think that, but it wasn't a widespread sentiment. It wasn't a driving force behind the campaign, and it certainly wasn't a dominant talking point as to why she lost the election or why people voted against her. And it's just a cheap and cowardly way out that avoids any accountability for the fact that he picked a poor vice presidential nominee. She wasn't very good at any of this. And then he stuck in the race, even though his brain had turned to mush until it was too late, then putting her in, honestly, I have a little bit of sympathy for Kamala Harris, just politically speaking, because she was in a very difficult position to have Biden cling to the nomination, run for re-election, even though his brain was cooked, he shouldn't have run again, and then leave her having to scramble and put together a campaign with just a couple months left to go. That is a very difficult position to find oneself in. I'm not saying she covered herself in glory. She could have done it better, but it's not like she had it easy because of the way that he set her up. And so I think that explains this BS identitarian deflection. He's trying to escape accountability. He's trying to admit or avoid admitting how he messed things up, because he did, and he's the huge culprit here. But it's cheap, divisive, race-baiting nonsense. And if anything, look, she was only the nominee because of her race and gender. That's just true, because when he was selecting a vice president, he specifically said, I'm only going to pick a woman, ruling out more than half of the Democratic Party's options. And then he said, I'm strongly leaning towards a woman of color. So it's a bit rich to blame the fact that she lost the election on extremely dubious and spurious allegations of racism and sexism when she actually only had that position and that opportunity in the first place because of a form of reverse discrimination of this DEI type. Not to say she wasn't qualified on paper. She'd been a vice president. She'd been a senator. Sure. but she was lacking in a lot of other areas. And there's really no disputing the fact that if she'd been a white male senator from California, she never would have been selected as vice president, and therefore she never would have become the nominee. Can anyone dispute that? Can anyone really argue that an identical senator to her named Bill Stevenson, some boring white dude, would have been picked as Biden's running mate? Can anyone seriously tell me that with a straight face? Even more wild than this maddening moment from Joe Biden was a follow-up segment on CNN where panelist Ana Navarro defended this and lost her crap on live TV. Take a look at this, and warning, guys, this is unhinged.
My point is, the idea that she lost because of racism is absurd. She lost because the country was in a disastrous place, and they blamed him and his policies that she had to defend.
Can I tell you something?
And he's a white guy saying, as a white guy, he won and she didn't win.
You as a white guy have the privilege of saying that racism, and you as a white male.
I'm saying it's an incredibly
I am telling you right now.
Statement as a white guy to sit there and say, I would have won with the same policies that she ran on.
As a woman of color, I am telling you that it is incredibly ridiculous for you, with the privilege that being a white male gives you in this country, to say that there wasn't some element of racism
I think it was
and
terrible
sexism.
The fact that people like Ana Navarro get paid millions of dollars a year for their profound political insight to be aired on cable news will never cease to astound me and hurt my soul, honestly, because I think a random person off the street could show up and make a much more coherent and sensible argument, because she literally didn't make an argument. Ben Ferguson, this conservative commentator, said, I don't think Kamala lost because of racism. I think it was her policies. That is a proposition. It is a debatable proposition, but there's a series of facts and arguments that go into it on its side, and then there's counter arguments. She responded with a total non-argument. She simply said, you're wrong because you're white, so you must be incorrect about this, and I'm a woman of color, so I must be correct. This is anti-logic. This is an identitarian mind virus, because it absurdly suggests that if you'd had a black Republican woman, which plenty do exist, commentator sitting there and saying the same thing that Ben Ferguson said, it would have somehow been more correct or more valid. No, it's an argument. It's either right or wrong based on its logic and its points. And I don't know how to explain to some progressives in 2025, I don't know how to explain to them how wrong it is to think that simply citing someone's skin tone makes you correct and them wrong. Again, babe, it's giving woke KKK. It's giving a complete lack of critical thinking, and it's the exact kind of divisive nonsense that's made Democrats so unpopular in this country. Other than that, though, great job, Anna. You're doing amazing. Now, while we're talking about this appearance that Joe and Jill Biden did on The View, we should talk about another moment from it, which obviously Biden has been in severe cognitive decline for some time. There have been all this reporting and all these books about it, exposing it behind the scenes. And to the credit of the one host of The View, Alyssa Farah Griffin, who I like, I don't agree with her on everything, but I like her. She seems nice. She actually asked President Biden about this, and it didn't go great, I should say. It did not go amazing for President Biden here. Take a listen.
Mr. President, since you left office, there have been a number of books that have come out, deeply sourced from Democratic sources, that claim in your final year there was a dramatic decline in your cognitive abilities. In the final year of your presidency, what is your response to these allegations, or are these sources wrong?
They are wrong. There's nothing to sustain that, number one. Number two, think of what we were left with. We were left with a circumstance where we had an insurrection when I started, not since the Civil War. We had a circumstance where we were in a position that the pandemic, because of the incompetence of the last outfit, end up over 1 million people dying. And we're also in a situation where we found ourselves unable to deal with a lot of just basic issues, and which I won't go into in the interest of time. And so we went to work, and we got it done. And one of the things Alyssa,
one of the things I think is that the people who wrote those books were not in the White House with us. And they didn't see how hard Joe worked every single day. I mean, he'd get up, he'd put in a full day, and then at night I'd be in bed, reading my book, and he was still on the phone, reading his briefings, working with staff. I mean, it was nonstop. It's the White House, being president is not like a job. It's a lifestyle. It's a life that you live. You live it 24 hours a day. That phone can ring at 11 o'clock at night or 2 in the morning. It's constant. You never leave it. And Joe worked really hard. I think he was a great president.
So Biden does come off as sharp and with it in this clip. Jill Biden, not Joe. And it is extremely telling that when asked about his mental acuity and the extensive reporting and books written about its decline and a huge cover-up in politics and media, President Biden brings up two bizarre, irrelevant things that have nothing to do with his state of mental fitness. One, January 6th, which happened before he was president, so I don't understand how does that affect your mental sharpness in office over the next 4 years. And then two, COVID-19, but the facts here, actually more people died of COVID-19 in America while Biden was president than Trump. And I'm not even saying he's to blame for that, but again, it just makes no real sense to bring up as a response, and also has nothing to do with his alleged cognitive decline that was put on full display at that presidential debate where he started talking about Medicare and all sorts of nonsensical rambling. And then I'm going to hold your hand when I say this, President Biden, but the fact that you trailed off in mumbling after about 60 seconds, not even, when asked about your mental fitness, and your wife had to come jump in, cut you off, and take over the answer and speak for you and explain it all for you, is not helping your case, Uncle Joe. It's not helping you beat the cognitive decline allegations at all. In fact, it kind of proves the point that a lot of your critics were making. And I've said this before. There is no shame in aging. There's no shame in the decline that Biden experienced itself. It's normal. It's natural. It's human. The shame is in clinging to power. The shame is in running for re-election again when you shouldn't have, when you should have passed the torch. You should have allowed Democrats to have an open primary and go through a whole process and come up with a better candidate potentially. And the shame is in the cover-up, the way they lied, they gaslit, they denied for years. The shame is in that. I always want to clarify this. There's not shame in aging. In fact, we should all be so lucky. There's not shame in things that happen to us as we age that we can't control. The shame here that will haunt the Biden legacy, I think, forever, is in the lying, the deceit, and the clinging to power. And clips like this just prove more and more how guilty they are of the accusations that have been made against them. But what do you guys think? Do you believe Jill Biden's version of events here? Let me know in the comments. All right, guys, now we're going to talk about another story, and this is a huge win for free speech. The Tufts University student who was arrested and detained by plainclothes immigration officials and had her visa revoked, all for writing an anti-Israel op-ed, she's been released at a federal judge's order. Take a listen to this local news coverage from CBS Boston.
It is the moment 6 weeks in the making.
Thank you so much for all the support and love. I am a little bit tired, so I will take some rest, but I really appreciate you being here.
Tufts University student Rameza Ozturk walking out of the detention center in Louisiana Friday evening following her legal team's victory in Vermont.
What we heard from the court today is what we have been saying for weeks.
The 30-year-old doctoral student was detained on the streets of Somerville in March, the video going viral. The White House said it revoked her visa because of a pro-Palestinian op-ed she wrote last year in the student newspaper.
There's absolutely no evidence that justifies detaining Ms. Ozturk for a single day, let alone the 6.5 weeks that she has been detained.
And on Friday, a federal judge agreed, saying there's absolutely no evidence that she engaged in violence or advocated violence. Her continued detention cannot stand. The judge went on to say Ozturk had serious First Amendment and due process claims. Ozturk video conferenced into the hearing from the Louisiana detention center in which she's been held, reportedly hugging her attorney after the judge's ruling. Governor Maura Healey wrote in a statement the court confirmed the case isn't about safety, but part of the Trump administration's campaign to silence those who disagree with him.
This is a big development, and it's making a lot of waves online. Connor Fitzpatrick from the Nonpartisan Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which, disclaimer, I do a little bit of freelance work for, wrote, "About damn time. The government, instructed by the court to provide evidence supporting her detention at today's hearing, had nothing. No witnesses, no exhibits, and they didn't even cross-examine her. It is shameful how this administration has treated her." He then quoted the judge. "There is absolutely no evidence that she has engaged in violence or advocated violence. She has no criminal record. She has done nothing other than essentially attend her university." I agree with this. I'm not against revoking student visas of people who come here and commit crimes like we've seen at Columbia and university. But the idea that the Trump administration is weaponizing immigration policy to remove people from the country and turn their lives upside down just because of an opinion that they express, to me, that's totally incompatible with support for free speech, free expression, and open debate, and all the other things that the Trump administration said they would champion when they were campaigning for president. It also very clearly, to me, has a chilling effect on open debate on campus, on people feeling free to speak their minds, and it will likely have a chilling effect in terms of international students wanting to come to the United States to study when they could go to schools in Canada or Europe or somewhere else. Why come to America where if you say the wrong thing on the internet, just have an opinion the government doesn't like, they might arrest you on the street and deport you and detain you for weeks in immigration facilities? I wouldn't want to come to the US in that environment. And international students are actually a boon to Americans because they pay really high tuition rates, much higher than local students and American students, which is a form of subsidy for the American students, right? They charge the international students way, way more, and that allows them to charge the US students a little bit less. So international students I think I generally view positively, and I don't want the government to start weaponizing immigration policy to crack down on just ideas. If we're talking about crimes, if we're talking about material support for a terror group like Hamas, that is something of a different story. I've talked about it on the channel in the past. And that's what they kept saying when I first commented on this case. Well, I'm sure it's not just over the anti-Israel op-ed. There's got to be more. She has to be involved with Hamas or something. And now we've seen it. They went to court and the federal government would have provided any evidence of that, and they didn't. Literally all they had was an op-ed where in a couple sentences she criticizes Israel, and you don't have to agree with anything she said, but it's just a political opinion in a student newspaper. I don't know how the Trump administration can possibly claim to be a pro-free speech administration while arresting people for criticizing a foreign government in their student newspaper. That is wild to me. But Caroline Leavitt, the Trump press secretary, is defending this. Take a listen to what she said when asked about it by a reporter.
Does the administration have any response to the news today that a federal judge has ordered the immediate release of Ramesa Ozturk from detention, and particularly his comments that the government submitted no evidence other than an op-ed that Ozturk wrote last year?
I will have to check in with the Department of Homeland Security on that particular case, but I think our overall feeling, we've made quite clear that lower-level judges should not be dictating the foreign policy of the United States, and we absolutely believe that the President and the Department of Homeland Security are well within their legal rights to deport illegal immigrants. As for visa revocations, the Secretary of State has the right to do that as well. It is a privilege, not a right, to come to this country on a visa.
So there's a lot about this answer that I find puzzling and kind of incoherent. First of all, these judges are not dictating the foreign policy of the United States. They are ruling on First Amendment and due process violations, which are rights guaranteed in the Constitution to persons in the U.S., not just citizens. And it is the job of the judiciary to scrutinize executive and legislative actions for violations of constitutional rights. So that's what they're doing. They're not dictating the foreign policy. And what's interesting to me is that The law that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is using to justify these visa revocations suggests that they have the unlimited right to revoke the visa of anybody whose viewpoint or presence in the U.S. may be a threat to U.S. foreign policy. Can someone explain to me how some student writing something in a campus op-ed threatens U.S. foreign policy? Like, oh no, we're not going to be able to support Israel and fund Israel now because Rumeysa Ozturk wrote something in the Tufts University saying her campus shouldn't support Israel. What? The math is not mathing. And I think that federal statute should be challenged in court, even giving the Secretary of State that authorization, because we don't want that kind of vast, unchecked power in any official. Another official, and say that AOC became our next president, could say, well, our foreign policy of the United States is being against Israel, so we're going to revoke the student visa of any student who expresses support for Israel. Is that really a game we want to play? And guys, Caroline Levitt mentioned illegal immigrants here. That's kind of a non sequitur. What we're talking about are legal immigrants here on student visas suddenly being arrested and having their lives turned upside down for daring to express a political opinion the administration doesn't like. That is wild. It is fundamentally un-American, and it is not something you can do while claiming to be a supporter of free speech and free expression. At least not while expecting us to take you seriously. But what do you guys think? Do you disagree with me on this? Do let me know in the comments below. By the way, guys, quick announcement. I did create a second YouTube channel where I will be uploading bonus content once or twice a week, including story times, ask me anythings, and other kinds of stuff. I already posted the first one, which is about how I got fired from my woke college newspaper for non-binary microaggressions and old racist tweets. If you want to hear that story and more that's coming out, I'll link to that new channel in the description and you can go subscribe. All right, everybody, that'll be it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go. Remember to comment with your thoughts. Check out the merch. Leave me a voice note, yada, yada, yada. And we'll talk again real soon.